Hello, and thank you for joining me today on my presentation on human trafficking of children, risk assessment, and treatments. My name is Brennan Ball. I have my Bachelor of Arts with specialized honors in Law and Society from York University, and I'm currently taking a certification program in victim assessments and interventions at Durham College in Oshawa. Today, I'm going to be going through some of the issues that children who have been sexually exploited experience. As an introduction, I'm going to explain the problem and profiles of risk that currently exist. I also am going to provide you with an understanding of intervention. Next, I will be providing you with two toolkits that are used to assist in the assessment of sex-trafficked juveniles. And finally, I will be looking at treatment options that exist and how best we can service and assist children with moving on from sex trafficking. Now, the first part of this presentation will be explaining the problem and going through some of the risk profiles. The risk profiles are very important for us in order to understand specifically how we can identify children that may be targeted for sex trafficking. The first goal of this presentation is to define human trafficking. Human trafficking is defined as the action or practice of illegally transporting people from one country or area to another, typically for the purposes of forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation. That dictionary definition comes from Oxford Dictionary 2020. For the purposes of this presentation, I will be examining the assessment and treatment options specifically aimed at assisting young people, both domestic and internationally trafficked sexual exploited individuals. Some things that we need to look at when we're examining profiles of risk is that many more females than males are trafficked. In addition, 1 in 3 street-involved or homeless youth, both boys and girls, reported some form of sexual exploitation as a result of trafficking, though this number is believed to be underreported. Although estimates vary, approximately 8 million children and adolescents are currently involved in human trafficking. 1.8 million of those children are being used in some form of commercial sexual activity. In a survey of 179 sex-trafficked juveniles, all of them were female. 67 were identified as Black, 61 identified as white, 28 were Hispanic, 5 were Asian, 7 reported themselves as being of other nationalities, and 11 identified themselves as unknown nationalities. For this study, the age range of these individuals was between the ages of 11 to 17. I will also be looking at a second study that was conducted, this time of 913 male and female sex-trafficked juveniles. For this study, the distribution of age was 19 of them were under the age of 12, 62 individuals were under the age of 13, 137 were under the age of 14, 192 were under the age of 15, 272 were under the age of 16, 229 were under the age of 17, and 2 other individuals reported that they were over the age of 17, but at the incidence of the study, they were currently underage. This graph, as you can see in this presentation, is a breakdown that shows the distribution by ethnicity as well as the percentage distribution by age. Further to the demographic details, there are other concerns. Of sex-trafficked juveniles who visited emergency medical centers, they were diagnosed with mental health disorders 93.6% of the time. Suicide ideation was diagnosed 37.9% of the time. Physical injury, either as a result of self-harm or harm by others, was reported 52.3% of the time. Sexually transmitted infections were reported at 69.8%, and substance abuse issues among this targeted demographic were at 79.3%. As we can see from the charts I've indicated here, the majority of sex-trafficked juveniles are diagnosed with some form of mental health-related exceptionality. As we can see in the second chart, these disorders vary and are often co-diagnosed, presenting difficulty in treatment options. Of those exceptionalities, only 46% are actively taking medication to treat that condition, and 68.3% are not receiving therapy for one or more of their mental health exceptionalities. Please note that the majority of these individuals have or are currently receiving treatment for one of their mental health exceptionalities at a rate of 77.8%, but the lack of treatment for secondary, tertiary, or other conditions of mental health exceptionalities presents further problems. Finally, there is the correlation between adverse childhood experience and sex-trafficked juveniles. As you can see from this chart, there are commonalities that sex-trafficked juveniles share. Many of these sex-trafficked juveniles experience family violence, which is the witnessing of intimate partner violence either between two parents, parents and other siblings, or siblings and other siblings. Parental separation, drug and alcohol use, and criminal activity as a minor are also indicators of potential sex trafficking for juveniles. If you take a moment to review the information on this chart, you will see some other commonalities that exist among these targeted individuals. Finally, there is the correlation between adverse childhood experience and sex-trafficked juveniles. As you can see from this chart, there are commonalities that sex-trafficked juveniles share. Many of these sex-trafficked juveniles experience family violence, which is the witnessing of intimate partner violence either between two parents, parents and other siblings, or siblings and other siblings. Parental separation, drug and alcohol use, and criminal activity as a minor are also indicators of potential sex trafficking for juveniles. If you take a moment to review the information on this chart, you will see some other commonalities that exist among these targeted individuals. So what exactly does all of this mean? In order for proper assessment to be done, it is important for us to identify key indicators of behavior. The typical victim of sex trafficking has some obvious correlations. The majority are girls. Many have histories of drug or alcohol abuse. There is a history of family violence. There is undiagnosed mental health exceptionalities. This helps us develop an assessment model that can identify potential victims before they become victims. This is the key to any form of assessment. Having the toolkit necessary to identify issues as a diversionary tactic, this is done as an intake for intervention in adverse childhood experiences, in medical intervention, and in the event of arrest. If we can identify sex-trafficked juveniles at an early stage, we can put them in the right streams and tracks to prevent further victimization. Evaluation of the process of clients is also instrumental to prevent traumatization and help bring sex-trafficked juveniles out of sex trafficking rings, providing them with tools and support to prevent recidivism. We can also use the assessment to identify specific, unique needs of the clients and ensure that they have access to the resources necessary to best support them. Identifying the mental health exceptionalities will allow providers to refer clients to the best mental health practitioners. So CPACT stands for Community Positive Achievement Change Tool, and it was developed in response to changes in the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice by a gentleman named Baglavio. The change was necessary in order to contextually analyze juvenile offenders to prevent recidivism and redirect offenders from jails. It was adapted from the Washington State Juvenile Court Assessment. The CPACT takes approximately 45 minutes to complete and goes through criminal history as well as familial and social history. Each item on the assessment is scaled and given a score. Upon completion of the assessment, the scores are added together. For example, one item on the assessment scale would give a male individual 0 points, whereas it would give a female individual 1 point. Points are given for school behavior, academic attendance, academic performance, friendships, foster home placements, history of running away, jail or juvenile detention stays, interactions with parents, alcohol and drug use, both past and present, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse and neglect. The CPACT is generally used with regards to juvenile offenders, however. It does have applications for sex trafficked individuals who have been arrested in conjunction with sex trafficking. The assessment should be administered if a victim services worker believes that it is relevant. The second tool that I would like to discuss with you today is called the Commercial Sexual Exploitation Identification Tool, which was developed more recently by Basson in 2017 as a means to identify sex trafficked individuals prior to arrest. The assessment tool was used in 45 agencies by over 5,000 children as a pilot project. The project identified 11.5% of the children who were assessed had noticeable characteristics associated with commercial sexual exploitation. They also found that 75% of the children had experienced this abuse for years, and that 75% did not recognize that they were being sexually exploited. Many thought that they had been chosen to be commercially exploited. The assessment was formed based on 3 questions. What are the observable indicators of commercial sexual exploitation? What are the socio-demographic characteristics of youth who experience exploitation? And finally, how should a screening tool be administered to maximize its usability and applicability in a variety of settings and to professionals with different training? Key indicators used for the tool are housing and caregiving, prior abuse and/or trauma, physical health and appearance, environment and exposure, relationships and sense of personal belonging, signs of current trauma, coercion, and exploitation. The survey is also shorter, with the average completion time being 15 minutes. The survey is also far easier and simpler to add up. When we are able to assess a sex-trafficked juvenile, we can start to treat and understand them. Since 75% of sex-trafficked juveniles are unaware that they are subject to commercial exploitation, part of any treatment plan must be to help them realize that what is happening to them is not okay. Helping them identify that they are victims and not perpetrators of a crime. The criminal justice system has taken steps to protect the exploited, and in Canada, it is recognized that a sex-trafficked individual has no obligation to participate in criminal proceedings without fear of being prosecuted. Rather, trafficked individuals are encouraged to participate in the court process to put their abusers in jail. Secondly, since many sex-trafficked juveniles have multiple mental health exceptionalities, many of which are codependent and undiagnosed, it is important to identify and treat the underlying conditions. And finally, we need to continue to support sex-trafficked juveniles, preventing them from getting caught back up in the trafficking pattern. Many sex-trafficked individuals find themselves returning to sex work as a means of financial support, and from there it's a short journey to being re-victimized by abusers. CPACT and CSEIT is underutilized, but with the success of identifying potential sex-trafficked juveniles, the hope is that they will gain more use over time. Knowing which toolkit to use and when to use it is vital to meeting our obligations with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. If you or someone you know is or has been subject to commercial sex exploitation, there are resources that can assist you. The Ontario Native Women's Association, Covenant House, FCJ Refugee Centre, and the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline are all resources that can help you get help, including treatment and supports. These supports allow you to remain anonymous, and there is no obligation to report a criminal act to the police. As a positive ending for this presentation, please see this graph attached, indicating the substantial rise in human trafficking arrests. I want to thank these individuals on my references page for providing me with details and insight into the problem of child commercial sexual trafficking. And I sincerely hope that you have learned something from my presentation today. Thank you very much and have a great evening.